I'd like to hand you over to the moderator, James McHale. James, are you making your way to the stage? Okay, I'll introduce you. So many of you might have eaten your dinner in front of the TV or listened to James' dulcet tones reading the ABC News. So James is going to lead the panel discussion. So without further ado, he's making his way to the stage. This is very theatrical, building the suspense. Here he comes. The long walk through the library stacks. Welcome, James.
How you going? Is this on? Hi. Hello. Kaya. Kaya, hello. Come on, everyone.
Good.
Oh, no, I meant these guys. Sorry. Kaya, hello. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on Wajak Noongar Budja and pay my respects to elders past and present. Wanju, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Can everyone hear me at the back? Can you just wave if you're at the very back? Lovely, thank you. My name is James McHale. Thank you very much for the intro. It's great to see you all here. Thanks for coming. It's blessedly quite temperate in here, which is nice, and has nothing to do with the fact that you're all here. I'll be facilitating this discussion today, right? So we are tight on time. We'll get straight to it. Carol Innes, unfortunately, can't be with us. She was on the program, was meant to be on the panel. She has a family emergency, and we wish her all the best with that. I'll start by introducing, on my right, Renegade is a proud Walbunja woman from the Yuin Nation on the south coast of New South Wales and now lives on Noongar land. Rena has lived experience of homelessness, the child protection and justice systems, domestic violence, alcohol and drugs, and homelessness. She's studying social work and works with the Family and Inclusion Network and Community Advisory Group for 100 Families WA. Amanda Hunt is the CEO of Uniting WA, an organisation working to inspire people, enliven communities and confront justice. An experienced leader in the not-for-profit sector, Amanda worked with others in her position to establish the WA Alliance to End Homelessness with the aim to eradicate the problem within the next decade. Professor Paul, I realise I didn't get the pronunciation of your name. I'm hoping it's Paul Flatter.
You can choose whatever you like.
Yeah, Flatter,
really, I don't care. Yeah.
All right, Professor Paul.
Yeah.
As we call him. Professor Paul Flattow is a chair in social investment and impact and the director of the Centre for Social Impact for UWA. He's published more than 100 publications and has made a significant contribution to housing and homelessness research in Australia. He works closely with not-for-profits, social enterprises, government industry and philanthropists, and covers topics like intergenerational factors, service integration, and the economic and mental health costs of homelessness. I'd also like to acknowledge Mike and Jade, who are doing Auslan interpreting for us today. Yes, thank you. Okay, so we'll get to this in a minute, but the topic is ending homelessness, which is, and this is an outstanding panel. We do only have, sort of 55-ish minutes now. So it is a lofty goal. And it will remain the goal for many of the people, well, for the people on the stage, many of the people in the audience, I'm sure have noticed a few people that work in the sector, just that I know personally. So what we're going to do is bring the scope in, and we're going to focus on the next 12 months. That's sort of the main thing that we want to look at is practical initiatives with immediate impact. Okay, it doesn't mean they don't have a long-term impact, but it's we're sort of trying to bring that scope in, see what action can be taken immediately. The theme of the festival obviously is a better world, so we're looking at what we might do assisting people who are experiencing homelessness, from assisting rough sleepers to reducing or removing those contributing factors and addressing the shortage of available housing. All right, so some of the other sessions here, I'm not sure if you've been to them, but we'll have a Q&A session at the end. I don't like to do that, so we aren't going to do that. We've got Jake and Billy, I think, is that right? On the microphones. Whereabouts are they? Oh, you're Jake. All right. And Billy, do you want to stick your hand up? Cool. So these guys have got... Okay. No worries. All right, we good? Thanks. So these guys have got roving mics. You know, it usually takes a little while for people to warm up to ask a question. So if we start now, I'm hoping that, you know, in 15 minutes time, you might start peppering them. We really want this to be engaging for you guys. We want to be talking about the things that you're interested in. So please ask any questions that you want. And we're particularly interested in ideas. And I mean, that's the whole point of this festival. So if you have one, or if you want to ask a question about why we can't do this or that, then please just ask. And if the chaps with the mics just want to wave your hands and... Oh, you've only got one mic? That's cool. It'll be Jake or Billy. All right. Any questions now? It's early. I wouldn't expect it. There's a lot of information you've just had. It's fine. It's fine. All right. So, Rena, I want to start with you because anything that we talk about today and anything that anybody proposes as a solution has to be, at the absolute very least, informed by lived experience. Ideally, you know, driven by it. If you were experiencing homelessness to someone who hasn't experienced it, how would you do that?
How would I do that? Frightening. It's frightening. As a woman experiencing homelessness, yeah, it's exhausting, it's frightening. And 6 years on from the last time I was homeless, I still live in fear every day. I have secure housing, a public house, but every day I think, okay, if I make this decision, is that going to affect that? Yeah, I don't think I'll ever get... And I've been homeless a number of times in my life, and I'm lucky I'm still here today. It's really dangerous. I don't know any woman that's spent any time living on the streets and hasn't been sexually abused. In my experience, the services that are around, there's not enough. There is simply not enough. And to be sitting there day after day, and also, I mean, I've talked about hubs for a long time. As someone who experiences lots of different crises in my life, I just find it so overwhelming that you have to go to one service over here, and especially when I first came to Perth and didn't know about the cats and I didn't know how to get around and stuff, trying to navigate from getting from one service to the next, to the next, to the next, and that's even when I've been housed, but on $1.50 for the day or for the rest of the week. Do I get my housing needs met? Do I go and have a mental health appointment if I can get in? Haven't got phone credit. Like, it's just, it seems overwhelming. And I know that there's a really big push for collaboration and for working hand in hand amongst all the organisations that I'm now involved with. But I'm not seeing that pan out in the new services that are being proposed. I'm still saying that there is one service on this side of town that does housing, but you have to go to the other side of town to get a feed and a shower.
When you were experiencing homelessness, what is a sort of typical day like?
Well, there's no beginning and no end, so let's sort of get rid of that.
Yep.
The only thing that used to mark my day was 10 o'clock at night when it was really getting dark and people would start moving away, and that's sort of the beginning and end of, really, because you just know that you can't lay down, you can't sit anywhere because you'll be in danger if you fall asleep. But also, again, through the day, I mean, Uniting is a brilliant service, but at Trambies, there's nowhere you can just lay down. Like, if you've had your feed and you just need to lay down and get some rest in a safe space, there's nowhere there to lay down. Yeah, for me, it was just sheer exhaustion, and then just this long line of predators who I'd have to actually latch onto one so that the next one didn't get me. And then when they'd had their turn or hurt me so badly that I couldn't, you know, like, so then you'd have to go on to another one. So, and this is how it would happen, that just trauma would just be compounding. And honestly, I'm just trying to think in my head, sorry, because now my head's just even gone, wow, okay, that's a huge flashback. And I look down on that street and I think how other times in my life that it's just been the most unsafe place to ever be. And sorry, it still gets me today. It still gets me. And for me as well, I've got 4 daughters. So my oldest is 26 and my youngest is 12. And every time that I've become homeless, I've had to either give them up or they've been taken by child protection. So for me, that's... And it's also possibly the reason that I've been able to manage to dig my way out of that crisis and that chaos, because the need to get back to my kids to save my very own life has just been overwhelming. And yeah, sorry, can we move on from being
Of course,
I just
yeah.
need to take
Sorry,
a breath
no
now.
worries. Did you want to say?
Yeah, can I just say, like, the first time that I met Rena, I was at the launch of the 100 Families research, which Paul will talk about, and Rena was standing in front of us with her daughter hand in hand. And as a person who works within a sector that vowed to end homelessness, that runs multiple programs that are aimed at supporting people in their experience of vulnerability and to get out of hardship, being faced by a woman who was so enormously resilient and strong and was standing in front of us with, I don't know if you remember this, finger pointed saying, "You guys need to do better." And I was like, holy cow.
Does that sound about right?
Like, we need to do better. And it's so true because, you know, one of the things that we've learned, and particularly through the research that you've done, is how the system has continued to push people aside and continued to keep Rena and your friends and women like you and men like you on the margins, you know, and living every single day at risk as well. And I think, you know, we all of us experienced that over COVID when we didn't know what was going to happen next. We didn't know what we were going to wake up to. We didn't know what the world was doing. That was Rena's life for a long time there. And I think we can all learn from the resilience that people that are accessing services and navigating services and are so clever and resilient. You know, because, you know, that's the thing when you were talking before about the experts in the room. You know, you're all here because you care about this as an issue. You're here because this is something that you want to do something about. The best thing that we can do is to listen. You know, I think any of you who were listening to the session outside with Anne Alley, she was talking about just shut up and listen. And I think that's the thing that we need to do.
Having said that, I will ask you about the problem, just to not assume any knowledge. And you know, I'm not sure who wants to take this, but it might be hard even to give a snapshot of the problem at the moment because of COVID. But we can move on to that. But you know, how bad is the problem at the moment in WA?
Well, it is significant, but it's broken down into different elements, I think. So we have the most extremes in terms of rough sleeping, which are levels are very high. So overall homelessness actually dropped between the 2011-2016 census, but rough sleeping rose. And that is an extreme point. And particularly with women, you know, the work that we've done around Australia, women sleeping rough have significantly worse outcomes actually than men. Yet services aren't necessarily aligned to women sleeping rough. It's really an important issue that we need to look at differentiated experience. But if we go outside of that, we've got to recognise that homelessness occurs in very different places with different groups of people. So something that we forget is that homelessness is occurring out there in the suburbs with young people and children. So 50% of those who are homeless as adults started the journey before the age of 18. Consistent finding across all of our research. And they'll be sleeping rough, but more particularly couch surfing out there in the suburbs, out there in the Perth suburbs. So we need to be very careful in our approach. You know, we need to work at different levels. We need to go out there into the suburbs, working with kids, working with teenagers. Often it's a family domestic violence issue, but looking at differentiated world. We focus a lot here in inner city Perth, but when you look at the stats, you look at Kimberley and the Pilbara, we need to have a wider perspective. Our family-based homelessness, we need to keep a track of all of these elements. And we need to say, turn off the tap into homelessness as well as end the homelessness that exists.
So is that something that's done, is that a sort of like an early intervention type thing, or?
And prevention,
Right, okay.
prevention and early intervention. So we know the story. We know that there are, you know, kids out there couch surfing right now. We don't work enough, for example, with schools. So we don't have integrated work around schools. Kids who are sleeping rough or couch surfing are highly connected to their school, really connected. In fact, they often sleep rough next to the school. But we don't have an imagination that says that we need to connect schools, teachers, principals with youth agencies and other support services. We don't recognise these kinds of issues. So we need to really take a holistic perspective, look at all the circumstances and experiences and follow each of those through in terms of our programs and our policies.
And we're looking at the picture at the moment, Amanda, that we've got those stats of a sense of how bad the problem is now. What are you expecting with COVID? Have we seen the impact of COVID now?
Absolutely. So we provide services, which is hopefully soon to be the hub that Renna is talking about, where people can come and will be integrated and make sure that they receive what support they need. But we're seeing anything up to 30 new people a week who are experiencing homelessness, who are sleeping rough. I met a woman on our doorstep the other day who had worked her way through all her friends. She'd lost her job, run out of friends to stay with, run out of money to stay at Backpackers, and had found herself for the first time on our doorstep and was terrified, like you said. And I think, it's what we're seeing is that.
Yeah, and there's been a bit of maybe a bubble with the increased COVID.
Supplement.
Yeah, the supplement, and that's I know something, Renna, that you have that you've benefited from. It is when those are taken away, what's that effect?
Look, already the decrease by $300 a fortnight, that's made a huge difference to my life. For that 6 months, and I was very grateful, and I was studying really hard, so I study full time at uni and my girls and everything, and it was great when it did come in. I was able to afford the internet that I needed weekly that I'd never been able to afford when I was on $40 a day. I was able to afford, for the first time, I haven't had to sweat about my cello parking, which comes out once a month, which is always typically on the week. I can't afford it. But even just that cut back, and don't get me wrong, I am so grateful. $250 more than I had pre-COVID is still huge. Like, I'm making that stretch. I'm terrified how I'm going to survive when they cut it right back. I'm going to have to go back to not affording anything extra for my daughter, buying the cheapest mints I can, going around looking for emergency relief, which I don't have time for when I'm studying full time. Plus I'm picking up, and like I say, I work voluntarily for a number of agencies and involved in a few projects. So I'm super busy, and I do believe that my voice is making a difference in this space. I do know that Amanda has heard me talk about hubs. Like hubs, it's a no-brainer. For someone who's in crisis to have to make even that decision in the morning, which service you're going to try and follow up and chase and get an appointment for. I used to love Women's Health and Family Services down here. At least I could walk in that door any given day, great reception, and they would find someone to help me. I would never have to worry that I wouldn't have a bus ticket to get home, and they would always make sure that I was seen to, that I had someone to speak to. So, and that's a smaller hub, I just think that such a great template, and I know that you're doing some amazing work, and I know that has been a real push with this 100 Families research project, and lots of people in the sector are wanting to hear the voices of lived experience, because as much as we're not gaining any new insight into things that we didn't know were happening for people who are living in entrenched disadvantage, what is happening is it's spending the time with people to be able, because we have our own solutions, no matter what crisis you're in. But if you ask me, what's my favourite colour, and all I can see is black and white, I'm going to tell you black or white. And can I have either black or white? Like, if I can have one of those, that'd be great, That's what I'm going to tell you when you're asking me what colour would you like to see. So it takes time for people to sit with you and listen to you and help you to be able to pull it out and really make some sense of what it is you're saying. I hate it when people listen to me and then go away and come back and go, I've decided that this is what I've analysed what you've said, and this is the solution I've come up with, and here you go, because I was listening to you. And I'm like, that's worse than what I had.
And Renna, it's a service response. When really what you're asking for is a human response, is people to see you and hear you first and foremost. And I think, why should anybody suffer the indignity of having to go and find something to eat when you are at uni trying to make a contribution? actually contributing to your community and giving back and helping change the way the system works, why should you have to go and find somewhere to eat? And why should the service response be the only response? Sorry, that's controversial because, we are a service provider. So, really, if we're providing that human-centred, which, we've all heard about it, we've all heard about a person-centred approach, but what that really means is listening to people's stories and saying, what's it going to take for you to have the life that you want? Is there a question over there?
There is, yeah. Sorry, I was trying to sign. I'm not. I got to work it out. You could probably teach me or something later on. We just had a question down the front, so if we could just grab one of those. Thank you. Or did we give it away? Oh, no, we got it.
I've got it.
Sorry, it's not. It's just one moment, Hope. Sorry, it's not.
Is that working?
There we go.
My name's Hope. I want to bring to the attention of the audience about the precarious women who are living in precarious housing. For myself, I live in private rental and I haven't had a lease for 6 years. And when I gently asked my landlady, she said, I'm thinking about it. But it means that I keep thinking any time I could be put out in the street. And I think that there should be something where landlords have to give leases. And for some in the audience may not know that the fastest growing demographic for homelessness is the older single women. And I don't mean the 55 plus women, because some of them have had superannuation, but I mean the other older women who sometimes, as you said, about couch surfing, they have to live in the house of their son or daughter. And often if the son, the daughter-in-law doesn't really want mum-in-law living there on their couch. But I'm just bringing this up because I've met, like the person from the library said, I've met beautifully dressed, turned-out women in public libraries who are homeless. And all they have is a little couch in someone else's house. And they feel so ashamed. And I said, look, don't be ashamed. This has been done to you. It's not your fault, because they do their best to keep clean, tidy, and engaged and end up in libraries. So thank you to the library people. But please don't render we women invisible yet again. Thank you.
And I've got to say, that's the fear that I live in every day. And I probably will continue to live in that because I've been homeless a number of times. I do think I have no super, I have nothing to fall back on. And if I become homeless again, which happened 6 years ago when my partner passed, at the private rental I'd had for 5 years, I just forgot to pay the rent. I didn't know what day of the week it was when he passed away, and I had no family to support me. So 6 weeks later, after 5 years of living in this house, I had an eviction notice. I worry as I get older and as I get older that I really need to see some change, very much like you need to see some change. I need to see some security for women.
I think there's another question here. It's just if we can make it a question to the panel, that would be good. Yeah.
Okay, I hadn't got a question in mind, but I just wanted to confirm what Hope was saying earlier. I have lived experience of at risk of homelessness. I'm now working with older women through a grant through the Department of Communities. And I just want to say, what can we do if we're faced with an 86-year-old woman who is homeless? She's been made homeless by her family and she's living in transitional housing. Initially, she was living for 18 years in public housing. Her granddaughter said to her, oh, Nana, I want you to come and live with us. And she'd been saying that for a long time, very close relationship with her granddaughter. She goes to live with the granddaughter, so forsakes her public housing, goes to live with her granddaughter, and the granddaughter takes up with another man who says, no, we don't want grandma anymore. Grandma's now living in transitional housing. She is, what you were saying earlier, Rena, terrified. And when I speak to her on the phone, I'm doing the best I can to find housing for her. She says, just talking to you, Wendy, helps to make me feel more relaxed and just less frightened. So what can we do when we're faced with an 86-year-old woman with nowhere to go?
We certainly have an issue around the interaction of the homelessness system and the aged care system in Australia. And it's heightened in Western Australia, as it turns out. The issue here is, of course, is the aged care system is very used to two things. One is those who are in a settled home environment in which they get in-home care services and they go through a proper assessment. Or it's, and in Western Australia, it's a very narrow line. It's used to those who have long-standing connections to homelessness and go from a homelessness service into a dedicated aged care facility. It's not good for those in between, the ones that you're describing. In Western Australia, unfortunately, we have only one specific aged care service that I know of that has that connection in terms of homelessness and aged care, which is at St Bart's, or close to St Bart's. That is far lower than what you'll see in other states, particularly Victoria. So we've been behind in the establishment of dedicated programs into residential aged care for those coming from a very significant homelessness background. But we do need to fix that interaction. And there's a particular program, ATCH, which is probably at a lower level here in Western Australia than it should be. So there are very specific things that we need to correct in Western Australia around aged care and homelessness, and that's something that I'm currently involved in. So very, very glad to hear what you're saying, and there will be a report out at some stage relatively soon, I hope.
Can I just say, it is with deep regret that I have to tell you that we've met two women this year with a very, very similar story turn up on the doorstep of Tranby. Women who are over 80 who have slept rough for the very first time in their entire lives because of that situation, because of family situations, and who have never met services. And I think the situation that you're talking about, Paul, isn't exclusive to women. It's exclusive to anybody that lives on the margins or falls between the gaps. And again, this is where our system is broken. And that's what we learnt over COVID, was that the system is so fundamentally bureaucratic and really siloed that what it's meant is that anybody who hasn't got a very a label and already in an experience of extreme disadvantage are left in between those gaps. So that's what we have to deal with as a system, and that's what we have to deal with as a community, and that's what we can all do. You know, we don't have to wait for the government.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess that's traditionally it's been driven by the government, or you know, I mean, no, because the not-for-profit sector exists, but they were the ones that had, I suppose, the overarching responsibility, and still do, I suppose. But so we're talking now about ways of
James, we all have the responsibility.
Circumnavigate. True. So if we're talking about things that would actually, help people practically, Rena, is it that hub? I mean, is that sort of the most
I believe
important
so,
thing?
but I'm the voice of one person. So that's what I believe would have helped me. And from sitting with peers and a lifetime of, I've been homeless since I was 13 in Sydney, so I've had lots and lots of times in my life where I've just sat in those circles and those spaces. And this is what I know other people have said to me. But again, I'm 6 years removed from that. And so it would be, I think it's vitally important that we're listening to the people that are in crisis right now, as well as listening to my voice, because obviously I've been homeless a number of times. So even though I've managed to crawl back up out, the minute I lose my little ticket or my little label, my little number, or I stop using those services, I become disconnected from those services. And it's like you go back to the beginning again. So it's like, and I've seen this happen for a lot of people too, they'll sort of climb their way up, and we know that recovery from anything is not linear. So it's very likely that people will come out of a time of crisis and get all that great support and be able to build up a bit. And then when things don't turn out well, it's like you've sort of had your turn in a way. So trying to get back into those services, along with all of the shame and all the feelings that you're having about having slipped back into that. So, yeah, I think it's like Amanda keeps saying, it's just so vitally important to really spend the time. And I understand that when organisations who are doing the best work are under time pressure and funding commitments and stuff, that it's hard to find that time to just sit and yarn. I mean, this is just such a space we need to get back to, just sit and yarn, and don't try and come up with solutions straight away. Really just listen and listen deeply, because what I need today might also change tomorrow. I might go, actually, that's not as important as that. And I hadn't even thought about this other thing being more important until I could hear myself yarning and hearing somebody respond in a way that was gentle and helped me get to the next thing, that actually what I think is vitally important today is different from what I thought yesterday.
There's no question that we have to work both at immediate needs. So if you've been out for the night, you need a shower, you need food. You don't need
You need a safe
place to
space
sleep
to have a rest.
You don't need a place that realizes there might be a few people rough sleeping, so they put lights on you at extreme levels to get you away from these kind of places.
Sprinklers, wasn't it? Around here?
Sprinklers, whatever it is.
Or police.
Constant.
Police in the city, it's the police.
Yeah, but at the same time, we need structural approaches. Like we need the housing. We need that increase in public housing. The government has allocated an extra 6%. That's great. There's a really significant investments. There's the big common grounds that are coming, which is great. But we need to work around private rental accommodation, head lease it into community housing, get that sorted straight away. We need people moving into housing in a housing first approach, what's called the housing first approach, straight away. So you can work both structurally, you can work in schools, you can work in housing, and you can work around showers and lights and all of that kind of thing at the same time. It's not an either-or situation.
There's a question from the audience here.
Hi, I'm Jody. Just wondering, what is preventing us from providing a safe place for people to sleep every night? And I mean, obviously there's studies and stuff around when you start to develop the buildings where everyone is sleeping rough or something. And we've seen in Brazil and the like, that's not very successful. So yeah, why aren't we able to overcome that? What's preventing us from saying, well, we've got hotels, we have apartments that are empty, the services are nearby. Why can't we do that?
This is like you're an audience plant, because that is the segue that I needed to move on to the next section. But, thank you. And so we have had the City of Perth Council elections recently. There's a chap there who has a question. We'll get to that in a moment. Homelessness was a massive issue for that. Basil Zemplis, Lord Mayor, focused on this Brisbane model called Bed Down, which is using car parks at night. Deputy Lord Mayor Sandy Angie supported the Safe Night Spaces model. It was on the agenda at the first council meeting, and this week has been approved. So $575,000, I believe, for 2 of those Safe Night Spaces, and I think that.
Yeah, and that starts with a women's service.
Yeah. So how do those work? What do they?
Well, look, I guess, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Rena, and we did the trial over Homelessness Week last year where we kept Tranby open 24/7 and provided a safe place for people to sleep. And what we saw was after a few nights of safe sleep, people were making good decisions. Because I don't know about you, but like if I have a bad night's sleep, I make terrible decisions. Can't think straight, and that's just one night. So, we saw after a few nights, people were saying, well, you know what, maybe I don't need to take drugs to stay awake. I don't need alcohol to self-soothe. And I'd like to get some help with what I'm here for and what is my experience. So I think there are places out there that the council have offered as safe nights. But I think you're exactly right, and I think that was the opportunity over COVID, was to look at places, hotels, hostels that are empty, and to find places. The issue is, as Paul said, is the permanent housing, because we don't want people to stay. We don't want people living in car parks. We don't want people living in. No, thank you, Hope. No, thank you. So we really want people to be sleeping in beds, because again, it's that you've already suffered enough indignity. Why should you sleep on the floor? So there are beds there, but we have to provide permanent housing. But if we can make sure that we help people to have a few nights good sleep, provide some wraparound support, and get to know people's story. I was last year, when we did the 24/7 service, spent time overnight listening to people. 2 o'clock in the morning is when people would kind of come over and make a cup of tea and tell their story and say what was going on for them.
Yeah, I mean, COVID was very interesting because there was a public health response around rough sleeping and COVID in particular, as well as into supported accommodation across Australia. And in a number of cities, it was actually complete in the sense of it was close to 100%. So when we did that work around that issue, we had 16,000 people that got into short-term motel and hotel accommodation around Australia. In particular cities like Adelaide, the placement into permanent housing was very high, and they're not putting people back on the streets. So we have seen a response around Australia, which was much more muted and limited in Western Australia. That was really significant. You know, when we put our minds to it, it was massive. And of course, it's only a temporary solution, but the focus in a number of those cities where there was a plan and data around getting people into permanent housing placements was an incredible shift into permanent housing, and it works. You know, the what's called the tenancy sustainability rate. You know, if you get people who have been rough sleeping into permanent housing, a lot of people would say, well, you know, you're going to have people going back into rough sleeping pretty well straight away.
Yep.
And what's the tenancy sustainability rate? It's actually incredibly high if you have support around that as well.
Because I think you get
It's
a bit of
incredibly
this reverse institutionalisation
Yeah.
when you've been out on the street. And I know that at one time in my life when I was much younger, I was actually quite fearful of being placed in a house somewhere out in the suburbs where I didn't really know anyone. It was hard to access any services or any supports. And I thought, you know what's going to happen? I'm going to come into the city and go to one of the services. I'm going to end up taking 4 people home, and I'm going to end up a prisoner in my house. And this has happened to me before, where actually the predators, I've invited them into my house, and the next thing, I'm not only being victimised and terribly victimised in my own home, but I'm also then left with debts and bad rental records because I end up having to flee that space because I'm no longer safe there. So there was, and I heard a whole lot of stuff that was happening around COVID, and I know that on my social media it was blowing up because people were being placed into hotels with no room, no windows, no, you know, like it was quite frightening for people to just have that, okay, we've heard what you need and we're just going to fix it. There was no real talking to people. I know that one of the Aboriginal corporations did take a group out to Point Perrin, I think it was, and they stayed in one of the campgrounds out there where at least that, so they were all fishing, like while everybody else is crying from in these locked rooms in hotels, that mob's out there fishing, lighting the campfire, yarning with each other. That's the stuff that I think will then lead to, okay, over those yarns, okay, where would you like to go from now? Because we understand that's going to be different for this person.
Yeah.
And Rena, what you're talking about is the social isolation too, and exactly what you said. You know, we see a lot of people who, there's one young woman I can think of who has you know, got a house a few times through the Housing First model, but she comes back to our service because she's lonely. And who of us haven't been really desperately lonely in the last 6 months? You know, so when a person is used to being in a community and used to identifying with a label or used to identifying with a group of people, and then is put in a hotel room, which, let's face it, is like incarceration, but it's there, you know, to keep you safe. But at the same time, we see people revolving through the service system because they're lonely. You know, if we could create a community around people being in a house, and as you said, Rena, like it's not just a service response, it's a community response. So ultimately the best solution would be is to make sure that people are supported into a house, but then rather than having services in there, people paid to be in people's lives, it's community reaching in, it's all of us, you know, going, what can I do? I'll give you some socks, you know, like instead of socks, how about just a friendship? So it's a different way.
And we do say in the AOD recovery circles that the opposite of addiction is connection. I honestly believe the opposite of all adversity is connection, and you can't, anyone who's isolated, but whether or not you fear that isolation or whether you fear that connection, it's a matter of really supporting people and listening deeply to what it is that they need at that time, you know.
Can I just, we'll take a question in a moment, but Amanda, can you just tell us, like, what is actually, safe night space? What is it? What does it look like? What is there? And then Rena, whether that's, is that the kind of thing that you would have benefited from?
So I think the what it looked like last year was purely and simply opening up the doors of what was our service, our day centre. It became day and night centre, and it just really a place for people to sleep. So overnight, people came in with their blankets and slept really, and they were all together. And again, my experience of it as a person who hasn't slept rough was it was a place where people came and felt like they could be cared for. We were bringing people cups of tea and people watching TV and really settling into a place where people were calm and settled. I guess what I'm imagining that the place that the City of Perth are proposing is, I'm hoping it will be the same, but I'm hoping that people will have kind of beds to sleep in, because I still don't think it's that respectful that people sleep on floors. Just saying.
But just even having that option to make a decision between taking drugs that night to stay awake or hooking on to the next predator or selling yourself, because sometimes that's safer too. Like, at least I know I'm getting something out of it rather than it just being taken. So being able to have those opportunities, I would like to know how many beds there are, because the fact is, no matter what service you're talking about, no matter what night shelter, refuge, there are simply not enough of them. There is not enough. There's not enough social housing. There are not enough support services. There are not enough beds in most night shelters and most refuges.
Do we know? Is it too early to say how many beds will be in the...
I think it was only announced this week, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay.
And my only criticism of that would be that, again, you've got one service up this end of town that's doing housing, one service over here, and the proposed where this is proposed for this place to be open is again over the other side, and none of them actually have a free cat that goes from. So if you're a person, woman or man, trying to carry your worldly belongings, you haven't slept for a week, you've had one sandwich because that's what you could grab while you were walking to this other service, and then you've got to get over here to be. And do you know how many different ways you can be pulled in between? It doesn't seem like a very long way when you've slept and you've got, some energy and stuff, but trying to get from that end of Northbridge to that end of MacGyver is massive. It used to take me all day, and quite often I would get detoured up here because someone would promise me something, a couple of bucks or a cigarette or something, and then I'd just miss getting to that service. So, and then to have to get there, and if there are not enough beds and you're being turned away.
But I think ultimately not ultimately, I think tomorrow we're interested in permanent housing solutions. This is fundamental, and we think of it as something that has to occur down the track. It can occur now. There are unoccupied buildings. We can do innovative programs around head leasing from private rental into community housing. There are those who can go straight into private rental as well. We can increase the public housing stock. This point about the journey, people do need to control their own journey into housing. It's not a matter of placing someone into a house somewhere. It is about talking to them about where do you want to go, what is your housing preference, and how can we help you on your journey, and that person taking control of that housing journey so that they're safe and in the right kind of place. The common ground developments, I think, are very important. That does meet that question of social isolation. So certain groups of people do want to be congregated together, and the common ground big builds, I think, are really significant, providing permanent housing with social connectedness in that kind of place. But yeah, we do need to focus on permanent housing solutions and agency around going into your house. You have to be the one who decides on that journey, because then you'll have that attachment and it'll be more aligned to your preferences. If you're placed in a place, you haven't had to do anything about furniture, you're not finding the place or anything like that, you've got a problem.
There was a question there. Sorry it took so long.
John?
You're holding it, is it? Okay. My name is Lionheart. I'm dressed colourfully because I've come to this gathering specifically to spruik the White Kangaroo Community Farm. Opening paragraph, capture the audience in the opening paragraph, you might hold them. My mother bought 100 acres of grassland with lakes surrounded by the Mount Lindesay National Park, 25 kilometres north of Denmark. It's pristine, it's as paradise as you can get. I consulted the good book, and the good book told me that the women of Jerusalem should shed off their clothes and put on rags and get out into the countryside and build farms and houses. My question to you is, how can I get through to people that might be the managers and organisers of these groups, so I don't have to dress up in lovely clothes with my banner, which is outside near the St John's Ambulance just there with the photographs and the maps and everything like that. I've gone to a little trouble. I'm just interested in how I do it. For the last 3 years, I've been trying to spruik this stuff. I'm in the Salvation Army. I go to the women in Rockingham. I'm a Rockingham Salvation Army, and they live in their cars and what have you. And it's pearls before the swine. And I don't want to sound too rude about that, but it doesn't get anywhere. I don't get anybody grabbing hold of it. What do you have to do? You've got this lovely lady here who's coal-faced. I know what coal-face is. I've been living in my bus for 25 years.
All right,
I know what coal-face is. So how do I get these different groups to listen to me, or to listen to the idea?
I think that's okay. I think that might be a question for afterwards, unless, yeah, I think we might leave that, and we'll be around afterwards.
The question here.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of questions. I'm concerned I'm also missing people at the back. So there's a chap over here by the column who had his hand up next. Yep, cool. We've got 10 minutes. So sorry if I've missed you at the back. Maybe head to the back after with the mic.
Okay, is this thing on? Hi, I've heard about some programs in the Netherlands where aged care facilities often open up to university students to stay there rent-free if they spend X amount of time with the senior citizens. Could something like that work in Perth?
It's a brilliant idea.
It is. And
Sold, I'll take one. I'd love
really
a nana.
good.
I would love a nana. I've got no family.
Okay, Ren is in.
in.
That's really awesome as well. And we've heard that. And it's also, I guess, another idea along those kind of lines of people opening their houses to people who could share the space with them and share the rent and share the support as well. Also, we work in partnership with Juniper, which is another uniting agency, and they're looking into, as rooms become empty, having people in there to support. So that's a really fantastic point. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John. Look, we know that the system is under huge stress. The turnaway rate is probably over 50% for every person that turns up to a service to get turned away. If that was happening in our hospitals, what would the response from the community be? If every second person who turned up to accident emergency, there would be outrage. So how do we accelerate that outrage to compel our governments to take action? Because the reality is it's solvable. We can do this. We just need support and urgency around that. So I'm curious to know, how do we raise that profile? How do we get that message out there that this is a system under stress? There are a lack of options for people to turn to. We need to create those options, and we need to tell our governments it's not good enough until we create those solutions.
A very good point, John. We did this model of how do we end homelessness, and I've got to say that I am part of the West Australian Alliance to End Homelessness, as John is, and we all are. We had these structural elements, more housing, etc. But one thing that was part of the model was advocacy and getting the idea out and people saying something about it. We do need to have a movement of people all committed and all saying, yes, this has to change. It is a fundamental part of our solution to homelessness that we get people engaged and to put pressure. So the stats are there. So John is quoting stats from the Specialist Homelessness Services Collection, SHSC. I know all about it. It has unmet need. We know the numbers who turn up. And it is, as John said, and if we had that same situation in terms of emergency units in hospitals or hospital beds, it would be an immediate response. It'd be out there. So we do need more and more people. And here is, how many? 300 people who can be part of that social movement and that advocacy to create the change.
And that was a question that I wanted to ask: is how to, if people are in the audience, they want to do, one of the frustrating things about talking about this is that it feels, you feel helpless, or you can feel helpless. So, do they get in touch with organisations? How can
No,
they,
I think,
help?
this is a call to action to all of you. You're not here because you don't care. So you're here because you want to do something about it, and you don't. A lot of people feel really helpless when you walk past a person who is, sitting on the side of the road as well. And we all want to do something as well. So what Paul's talking about, what John's talking about, is educating yourself with the why. One of the things we didn't talk about is, what is the antecedent? People aren't born homeless. People are born with a home. People live in families. People are part of a community. Something happens.
And I think there's a lot of people that do, but there would be some people that's sitting there thinking, but how exactly? Like, tell me how exactly. Where do I sign up? How can I add my voice? How can I make this? And I don't have those. Well, I do. I get onto Facebook and I just go homelessness, WA Homeless Alliance, and I join up for everything. I sign the petitions. I've for the first time in my life have been voting for the last couple of years. I know it's, but I'm educating myself as to where is my vote going to make the biggest difference, and the projects that I'm involved in, I'm pushing to make sure that these researchers ensure that that's how we're going to raise the rate, because at the end of the day, it comes back to poverty. Every intersection that you see throughout the community with issues around mental health, with issues around homelessness, it all comes back to that having no money. And if we go back to $40 a day, that means once my rent's paid, I have $20.50 per day for me and my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter. Who raises a 12-year-old on $20 a day? And that's, without everything else. And this is what it comes down to when you have no resources of your own as well. When you have no resources, that just leaves you feeling destitute and despairing. And then when every door you go to, you're getting knocked back. Every second door you go to knock on, they're saying, sorry, can't see you today, can't see you next week, try a different service. And, and once you've done the rounds once, then you've sort of had your turn. You have to move on, So it's about resourcing people and ensuring that but it is pretty simple, just being able to add your voice. You just have to get on board and, like Amanda says, educate yourself, find out what groups are around locally and sign up.
All right, we're almost out of time. Hopefully we'll have time for a couple of questions. If you can keep it tight, please. Where are we?
Yeah, hi. This is touching on, I guess, a comment or a point that was made before about sort of co-living or home sharing programs. And I had an idea for something which I've recently learnt thanks to the Compass program on ABC. Some organisations on the East Coast are already doing it. But matching a middle-aged woman who's on the brink of homelessness, perhaps through, unemployment or relationship breakdown, matching a woman with an elderly person who needs some companionship, some help with some light home duties for 1 or 2 hours a day, has spare rooms in the family home, isn't at the point where they need to go into aged care. And I think there's sort of synergies there, and the economic sort of, I guess, benefits to one side, with social isolation, I think, being a huge issue for the elderly and for people facing homelessness. And I appreciate this sort of arrangement wouldn't be suitable where there's, mental illness or substance abuse involved. It would have to be, obviously a sort of specific category of women. But yeah, I was interested in the panel's thoughts on that and whether anything like that is being done in WA.
What I really love about that is that it's for community by community, and it is about people staying together. I remember talking to John Berger about this many years ago in the context of women as well, saying, you know, women, we should be looking after each other, you know, we should be taking each other, you know, we should be supporting each other. And that's why, you know, I love Renner as well, is because we need to stand together, and it's that kind of informal community support that's strong, but it is about the relationship, isn't it? You know, I'd like to take a lot, you know, people home that I find outside of our service every day, because you want to support people as well. But I think it is the relationship, and I think what you're talking about is really, really powerful, and we have to look at different and creative ways.
All right, I'm really sorry we are out of time. Sorry for everybody whose questions we didn't get to. Can we please thank our panellists, Renner Gade, Paul Flatow, Amanda Hunt. Our best to Carol Innes, who couldn't make it. Thanks to the State Library for hosting. I want to thank Ran Adams and Gail Mitchell from Uniting WA for their help, Charles Hayne as well. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks for engaging. I'm sorry I didn't get to your questions again. I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you very much.